All right, so I just had a few things, and we do need people to get activated immediately around my campaign and the LaRouche PAC and the fight to remove Obama. Are we off? I can still hear them. You didn't hang up. Okay, thank you. Anyway, first of all, if people receive this is the first color brochure of my campaign, and I want to point your attention to this pink cone that is in the middle of this brochure. And what I wanted to do is take just a minute to discuss this because I think it's very important. This is a graphic image of some breakthrough work that has been done by LaRouche's science team with Mr. LaRouche. Can we have the first slide? So what I wanted to show you, this is one example, which is closed animal systems. In other words, animals, and everybody probably knows if you have a domesticated one, they tend to be very repetitive. They may do things in response to you, but they don't make breakthroughs, they don't change their behavior, and they don't change behavior from one generation to the next. Beavers have been building their lodges and houses for many generations, and I haven't seen any evidence that they're changing their behavior, although it does look very cute and cozy inside. It's been the same over and over again. So what has happened, as people know, many people who have been studying the website, is you've had a number of what are called extinction crises. But what you can see if you look at, say, the beginning here, this Paleozoic cone, is it's on one trajectory, and then while it's in the middle of that trajectory, I'm just going to step away. You see the apex, the point of another cone that's beginning, that's inside. In other words, whatever the breakthrough was at that time, and I think the feathers and things maybe came a little later, but you could imagine maybe it was a few of these creatures sprouted feathers, and they couldn't fly. You didn't have flight, but there was some kind of a breakthrough, some kind of a change, which was developing and overtaking, which is the second cone, which is a little bit wider. And at a certain point, the first cone, the diagram shows, you can imagine it continues. Actually, what would happen is it would collapse. That in the case of our solar system, there seems to be cycles where we go through extreme weather, extreme climatic changes, and the majority of the species in the old domain not changing their behavior, not changing their biology, don't survive. But the characteristic, the character trait, which is the breakthrough, which is that little dot in the beginning of the old system, becomes dominant. So that most recently, at the end, what happened, as we've discussed on a number of occasions, is that while the dinosaurs and reptiles were the predominant species, this was before the last major extinction 65 million years ago, sometime during that time, you did get mammals, but they were little, and they weren't very advanced, and they weren't the dominant character, they weren't the dominant creature. But when you had the crises that hit 65 million years ago, they managed to survive and flourish, whereas everything else disappeared. So what you see throughout the development of the biosphere is a series of these little breakthroughs. Something happens which is a superior character, and throughout the development it becomes the dominant superior feature. Next. Now this one I particularly like because it shows the question of energy and metabolism. And what you see down there on the bottom is a chart. I don't know if people can read it. The bottom line, I think, says salamanders, all reptiles, lizards, mammals is the second curve from the top, and birds. And what that's showing you is how many calories per gram per hour of body mass need to be consumed. So you can see way down there on the bottom, those poor amphibians, the salamanders, they don't consume all that much, and even reptiles are pretty low, and anyone knows if you ever had a pet snake that it'll eat, if it's a big one, you might feed it a couple rabbits, and then it doesn't eat anything for 6 months, or, and they're cold, and if they go out and lie on a rock, they get warm, and then they can do things, but they don't have their own energy. So when you get to mammals and ultimately birds, for what we do, for what mammals do and birds do, you actually need an enormous amount, you consume an enormous amount of energy per mass. And that's actually a good thing. That is a development. That makes it possible to survive better where you have changing temperatures. Imagine if you're a reptile and your temperature is the temperature of the atmosphere. Then you are very dependent on what the climate is. If you're a mammal or a bird, you are able to regulate your temperature to a certain degree. And it makes you more adaptable and more likely to survive things which the reptiles could not. Okay, next. This is fun because it really flies in the face of all these idiots who follow the line of Parson Malthus, which is that population grows exponentially, but our resources only grow geometrically, and therefore the world is overpopulated. We're going to run out of resources. Here is an example of corn, what is now the modern day corn, and that little round thing next to it is supposed to be a quarter. So on the left side you have teosinte, which was the early precursor of corn, and you can see those little, grains. They were just hard. There wasn't much substance to them. It was pretty nasty. If you were starving and someone handed you one of those, you wouldn't be really that appreciative. But now, after human intervention and cultivation and breeding and so on, you have the modern day corn, which, an ear of corn is actually something which provides a certain amount of nourishment and a certain amount of substance. And you can see that it is orders of magnitude larger and more nutritious than the original. So the truth of the matter is that through human intervention, our resources actually, including even food, actually can increase exponentially, exactly as you saw in the development of the leaps in the animal systems earlier. Next. Now this is really fascinating, and it's I want you to think about this because it's a really ticklish thing. How many people here ever saw the triple curve function of LaRouche, the collapse? People know it looks like a trombone bell. Now, for one thing, it's not a cone, it's actually lines. But you do have the sense that when you get things that go in these hyperbolic curves, that you're going to get to an asymptote. You're going to get to a line where, for the math people, it goes to infinity or whatever you want to say, but there's some kind of boundary condition. So we saw that with the collapse function of these lines. This I find a real tease, and we'll look at it more in a couple different ways, because it's cones which are clearly hyperbolic, and what you're looking at is on the outside, the largest human society, that through human creativity we have the capacity to multiply by orders of magnitude our resources, our standard of living, our consumption. And that as we do that, it changes the domains of the lower orders. That is, if you have 7 billion people on the planet, what you need from the planet to sustain that population is much greater than if you only have 1 billion people on the planet. So the cones underneath the human society cone are affected by the developments of the human society. And you can think for a minute, what happens if a human being, if you have a lunatic like an Obama or some crazy environmentalist like Al Gore, who says, well, we're just going to stop consuming energy. Everybody turn out your lights. We're going to have solar panels, so we're going to cover the entire state of Texas, and you might be able to have 3 light bulbs in the whole state of New Jersey and try and get by. What would happen is not just that you would lower your population to some previous rate. But if you think about the requirements that you now see in these lower cones, the whole thing would implode. You would get collapses like you never imagined. Like, imagine what would happen to food supply if you didn't have refrigeration. I mean, how many people have gardens in their backyards today? So if you didn't have, what if you suddenly had no clean water? How quickly would the population totally implode? In other words, it wouldn't be, the whole thing would just, you know, like a planetary system imploding. It would collapse in ways that you wouldn't even expect, certain things that you wouldn't even think of unless you were going through it. Now, what you see here is what human beings have done through our discoveries. You have fuel and a weight equivalent. These weights produce, I don't know what the amount of energy is, but they produce equivalent amounts of energy. So with wood, you needed 23.5 tons to provide the same amount of energy that you get with 6 tons of coal. Okay, that's already 4 times more efficient. Only 30 barrels of oil. I don't know how many barrels make what would weigh a ton, but 30 barrels of oil is definitely not a ton, or 6 tons. Then nuclear fission. This is a major leap. 1.86 grams of fuel. Okay, a little teensy gram, almost 2 grams of fuel gives you the same amount of energy as 23 tons of wood or 30 barrels of oil. You get down to nuclear fusion, and it's only a half of a gram. And then what they're working on right now is antimatter, which is 2/1000ths of a gram of fuel will give you the same amount of energy. Now you look at this, you say, why on earth are these so-called environmentalists, if they're so concerned about pollution and waste, how come they're not calling for fusion? How come they're not calling for antimatter? I mean, wouldn't it be great if human beings, if you could power a whole economy on, I mean, probably 3 grams of fuel and antimatter would like, you know, power the whole United States. So all of these people who are allegedly so concerned about our resources, how much we're consuming, if this were actually their concern, if they weren't lying, if they weren't just being used as tools of a British depopulation scheme, this is obviously what they would be doing. And also what you see is that this progression is man's willful transformation of the universe and of our relationship to the universe, which no animal can do. You see it in life, you see it in the biosphere, but it's not a matter of choice, it's not willful. Next. Now again, and I thought of this when LaRouche was talking about Nawapa, because what you also see as you get these more developed, more advanced societies, these numbers, these pink lines on the bottom, indicate the number of sea creature species, that is the number of different species supported by one single species of phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are the little teensy, like single-celled things like the cyanobacteria that we saw in the Glass-Steagall film. They're in the ocean. So in the Paleozoic era, about 5 different types of species would live on one kind of phytoplankton. In the Mesozoic area, it was 10, and the Cenozoic, it was around 60. So what you see is that life itself becomes much more complex, much more intertwined. So one type of species which used to only affect 5 others suddenly has a totally symbiotic relationship with 60 others. And this really reminds me of what Lynn was just saying about Nawapa, that to build Nawapa in the 1960s would have had a certain, of course, very beneficial effect in terms of water in the U.S., energy, cleaning out the Great Lakes, Colorado, jobs, science, and so on. But to build it now, when you have Russia doing this incredible, groundbreaking work on the development of the Arctic, and the fact that Nawapa begins in Alaska, and you have the discussion of the Bering Strait Tunnel, then to build Nawapa today is orders of magnitude, having it today is orders of magnitude more powerful than in a different era, because the nature of the whole time is changing in an exponential and more complex way. And then last, this is the one where it really starts making your mind tickle, because what it shows here, it's the one with the energy, but it shows that between wood and coal, it took 400,000 years to go from human beings burning wood to burning coal. To go from burning coal to burning oil only took 2,200 years. From oil to fission only took 100 years. And fission to fusion, I mean, really, if we'd done any work, it might have been 20 years. And so then I started thinking about these curves. I mean, it makes your mind, because you're imagining this shape of a hyperbolic curve of just an explosion of development, and then it's very hard to get your head around where it ends, or how does it end, or are we going to have a breakthrough every 2 hours, or what's the nature of human time once you get to this point. And that, I think, is something to really consider. In other words, when Kennedy said we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him safely back to Earth, not because it is easy, but because it is hard, there was an idea that when you make this breakthrough, there are things that you can't even think of, that have not even entered your wildest imagination, that you're going to discover, that will accelerate the relationship between man and the universe. And that's where we actually are headed. And this, by the way, is also the kernel of what Alexander Hamilton understood when he designed the credit system. And you can think of things in human economics. I don't know, someone here probably does, I don't know what year the first steam engine was built. But when the first steam engine was built, I don't think that immediately it was the dominant mode of transportation. But over time, it became clearly much more efficient than an ox or a horse or something, and it became dominant. The same thing with the first automobile. Or Einstein has something which I found really delightful, where he talks about the first time people had bicycles, and you had a lot of people getting run over because they weren't used to it, and then it became a common mode of transportation. So this is human economy. It's a physical dynamic that's part of the universe. Its value is not in money. Money is an instrument. It's an instrument of credit, as Hamilton understood it more clearly than probably any American founding father, to allow human creativity to flourish and to make the breakthroughs where you get to these ticklish points where you don't know how quickly the next discovery is going to come upon the previous one, and how quickly that will be assimilated by your society. And this is really what mankind should be looking at, should be thinking about right now. This is what the Russians and the Chinese are interested in. This is why the British Empire wants to destroy them. And a nuclear war would do that. And you can also see, conversely, if you had a United States with a leadership like Kennedy, with a leadership that said, we are going to work with these nations on the greatest discoveries of mankind, it would be the end of the British Empire and the end of oligarchism permanently. Who would want to be starving and ignorant and backwards when every child had the potential to become a Beethoven or a nuclear physicist, or whatever is beyond a nuclear physicist? We don't even know what people are going to be able to become once we do this. So at any rate, I just wanted to take a little time, because you're going to be seeing these cones all over the place. You've probably seen them all over the website and on my literature, but I think it's a very good heuristic device to give a conception of what it is that we are actually fighting for, and what is man's relationship to the universe. Now, I have a few announcements to make. Number one, in case everyone here is not aware of this, we need money. And we need money here. I explicitly want to ask that people do a matching fund. If you have not completed your $5,000 legal limit to the LaRouche PAC, that you contribute equal amounts to Diane Sayre for Congress. I need funds for the campaign. There's a legal limit on that, $2,500 per person per calendar year, and we need to raise some money at this event for that. To give you an example, these brochures, if you don't print them in very large numbers, to do color printing is almost $1 a copy. And we can't get donated ones because that would be an illegal corporate contribution to my campaign. And unlike Obama, I am obeying the law on this. Okay, so we need funds to Diane Sayre for Congress. And we also urgently need funds to the LaRouche PAC. So everyone who has not done your $5,000 legal limit, I would appreciate if you contribute to make 2 checks for equal amounts, Diane Sayre for Congress and LaRouche Political Action Committee, and you can do that at the table in the back. The other announcement is that, where is Elliot? All right, Elliot's waving in the back. Stand up longer, they didn't all see you. Okay, and Stephanie, where is Stephanie? Oh, she's in the back too. Okay, Elliot and Stephanie are going to meet with everybody who lives in the 5th Congressional District here in New Jersey. I need to get 200 valid signatures from registered Democrats or independent voters to get my name on the ballot. It's frankly not that high a requirement. What we would like to do is to get 1,000 signatures and get them early. The deadline's April 2nd. We want to file by March 15th, and we want to have 1,000 signatures. So anyone in the 5th Congressional District should meet with Elliot and Stephanie. Where? In the back, Elliot? In the back, I guess on that side. The contribution table is on that side. Elliot and Stephanie will be there to discuss your schedule, taking petitions. People can do this on your own. You can do it with someone or whatever to help make sure that we get what's needed to get on the ballot. So I think that's it. So thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you afterwards and put you to work. Thanks.